Shannon, hi, and thank you for joining me today. I am so excited to be here with you and talk about this exciting metabolic treatment that we are dealing with very successfully that has had the power to change our lives. Like a very brief intro to everyone who is listening, you're one of the Metabolic Mind Fresh Start Award winners. And the way you described yourself is just someone who was living with mental illness and is now not dealing with the symptoms as well, which is powerful. And that's what this is about. That's the topic that I'm personally fascinated with. And that's the reason why we're gathering here to hear more about how you got there. And so I would love to hear a little bit about where you were before that. I know you have been someone who really worked hard to follow the rules, to, circadian rhythms, working with therapists, like really taking your meds and all that. So tell us more, your personal story, your experience. How did that work for you, and what were the challenges and the symptoms and all of that in your own personal history?
Okay, where do I start? Perhaps I'll start at the beginning and just do a sort of an overview of what bipolar looked like in my life. So I suppose there are three distinct stages, which is before I was diagnosed, after diagnosis, and then after ketogenic therapy came into my life. So I have bipolar 2 disorder. For me, that means I have a pattern of highs followed by lows, and then with periods in between episodes of pretty much reasonable mental health. And those episodes could last anywhere from sort of 6 weeks to 3 months, but in the early days, before I was doing any management, really, I could be ill for up to 6 months. So for me, this started at about 15, which is fairly common for bipolar. It took a long time to get diagnosed. I didn't get a formal diagnosis until I was 40. And people might think, well, if you didn't even get a diagnosis till 40, perhaps it wasn't that bad. But I used coping strategies in my life. So I used withdrawal a lot. Certainly in my depressed periods, I wasn't able to leave the house or hold down a job or, keep a relationship together. So yeah, I used withdrawal, and then as after diagnosis, when I got to understand what a hypomanic episode was a little bit more, I also used withdrawal in hypomanic episodes too, because I realized that I was doing damage to the structures in my life in the hypomanic part of the episode. And then I wasn't able to leave the house in the depressed part of the episode. But so I started withdrawing in both parts of that.
Yeah. How were
Which
the withdrawals in the hypomania were showing up for you? What was that look
Well,
like?
it was difficult. So obviously, for people who don't know, bipolar, it is such an illness of extremes. So the furious energy, I had quite elated, ecstatic highs. I was gregarious, I was outgoing, I was engaged, I was vivacious, I was driven, I was starting projects, I was persuading other people into starting projects. I was also experienced hypersexuality in that, which put me in a lot of dangerous positions. That's more common for women with bipolar 2 than for men. It's not as much talked about. Doctors and clinicians seem to shy away from talking about that one a lot. It becomes a shame point in the process of the illness too. So when I was experiencing those kind of symptoms, I behaved in ways that I wouldn't normally feel comfortable with at all, that weren't in line with my own moral values. Judgment at that stage of bipolar for me which is the very hardest thing about bipolar for me, is loss of judgment. It is, and so I knew well before I was diagnosed at 40, I knew I was mad, and I personally used the term mad, and I'm comfortable with the term mad. I knew I was mad, but I didn't know I had a mental illness. And some people would find that I knew I had depression. You can't miss that. I couldn't feed myself. I couldn't get off a couch. I couldn't go out. I couldn't make eye contact with people. I had suicidal ideation with that. Just despair, complete despair and absence of wanting to be alive in this world, repeatedly, on repeat, again and again and again, episode after episode after episode. But so did Winston Churchill. You know, and Winston Churchill ran a country. So I knew I was mad. I knew these things weren't normal. And you know, doctors had actually, and this happens a lot with bipolar, diagnosed me with major depressive disorder at times. But because they'd missed the hypomania, and because the hypomania felt glorious to me, although it did a lot of damage, I wasn't reporting that. I didn't know that was a mental health system. So that sort of got missed. A lot of people with bipolar get misdiagnosed as major depressive disorder first. I was one of those, but unfortunately, the sort of psychological therapy for major depressive disorder wasn't working for me at all, and it didn't feel a fit for me. I had a really positive attitude. I didn't think I had, you know, huge psychological problems that were bringing down my mood. And then, of course, the depression would clear. I would stop seeing any therapist, and I'd go, okay, well, I'm fine. And then it would happen again and again and again and again. I reached what I call ground zero a couple of times, which was like loss of relationship, loss of all money, loss of job, loss of stable housing. You know, just I was never homeless on the street, but I did couch surfing. I wasn't able to study. I wasn't able to finish qualifications. Not being able to study or finish university was a great grief in my life for a long time. I tried and tried, but episode after episode, I just wasn't able to manage that. I wasn't able to hold down responsible jobs. As I got to know myself as a mad person who sort of ceased coping at times in my life, I stopped seeking responsible jobs because I just felt that I would let people down. And that kind of repeated failure after failure after failure, failure of maintaining a job, failure of getting qualifications, failure of holding relationships together again and again and again, that takes a toll on your self-esteem and self-worth as well. It's a really difficult road. Why couldn't I do what my peers did? Why couldn't I do what my colleagues did?
Yeah.
I didn't think I was a bad person. I didn't think I was an incapable or stupid person. I thought, you know, I'm as well placed as I can't do it. I can't manage it. And anyway, that went on for sorry to start the episode on such a downer, but you know, this is bipolar is it can, a lot of it can be hidden. What is seen is judged, and sometimes judged harshly, and what is hidden, I think, is a lot of despair. And anyway, so that went from 15 to 40.
Yeah. Wow.
That was my life.
Yeah.
By 40, I had children, and I couldn't withdraw anymore. I could not withdraw. I was mum, and I didn't have a huge amount of, daily support or anything like that. So withdrawal was not going to be an option. And I had a huge episode, and the shift from hypomania to depression came in a 30-second window. Literally, I just crashed. And I realized this time that what I'd been experiencing for the previous 2 months was in fact hypomania. I actually recognized it, and I went to my GP, my general care physician, and then I went to a specialist psychiatrist, and I said, I think I've got bipolar disorder. And yes,
Oh, wow. So
everybody
you suggested that this is your diagnosis.
Donica, I did more than suggest. I said this was my diagnosis. I had a very clear understanding that what had happened to me in that previous 2 months before that moment in time was hypomania. And I was able to look at that and, look at what the definitions of that are, and to recognize that. And that was confirmed. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm curious there because that's a big one. Do you think that you couldn't clearly communicate the occurrence of those episodes before because you didn't recognize them as such? Or
I
like
didn't
never would have?
recognize, I laugh sometimes, and I say to people, sometimes bipolar people are the only, when you're managing bipolar, for me, sometimes I'm not managing bipolar anymore, but when I was managing bipolar, sometimes a good mood would have me afraid. I'd have a good mood and I think, oh, how good is this mood getting? Is this good mood getting to the point where it's so good it's heading into hypomania? And I could be afraid of a good mood.
Yeah.
But before I was diagnosed, some people have really agitated highs in bipolar. I didn't. I had glorious, ecstatic, beautiful highs.
Yeah.
And you don't necessarily recognize that something that feels so good is mental illness. I knew even before I got diagnosed that the way I spoke to people in those highs was too much. I was too much for people in a social setting, and I recognized that. But it felt so good that that illness wasn't the first thing that jumped to my mind. Yeah. So once I recognized, and as I said, the depression was impossible to miss. I knew I had periodic depressions. That's a no-brainer. I was, laid low by them. But when I realized that what hypomania was, then because I had a really severe episode, and the swap from hypomanic to depressed was almost instantaneous. So it didn't happen over a week or two. It happened instantly, which made it much easier to see. And then I was able to re-examine my entire life before that and see the recurring pattern throughout my life. And I can, I can see it in terms of job loss.
Okay, so you didn't necessarily seek the help before that with someone who would prescribe you medications, or like with the
Well, I tried it. Yeah, I tried in my early 20s, but they were all going for depression, and it didn't fit for me. And then, the depression cleared up and I felt fine. And at that stage, I didn't even believe that depression, to begin with, in my 20s, I thought I must be dealing with some sort of psychological issue.
Yeah, yeah.
So I wasn't keen to take medication for a psychological issue, and I didn't believe any of that had a biological basis. I just didn't believe that. I thought it was, I thought I must have issues
Yeah.
that needed sorting out. By my 30s, I didn't believe that I had severe psychological issues that were causing me depression that needed sorting out. By my 30s, I thought, this is just my lot. I'm just one of those people who has periodic depression.
Yeah. And you didn't take medications for it?
No, well, I no, I didn't.
Okay.
No, very, very wary of very wary of medications.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I know this can be a very tricky experience where you were misdiagnosed with depression, and someone who has bipolar type 2 should not be put on antidepressants. And I was very close to that with my prescriber, right? They were like, oh, let me ask you a few more questions, like in the 10 minutes interview that I did the first time, because I was also misdiagnosed with depression. And then when we dived in deeper, she was like, oh, I'm really glad that I asked you this, because you should certainly do. I was going to prescribe you this, but now that we know this is more like, it's not depression, it's bipolar type 2 depression, and that's different, and that should be treated different. And if I had put you on the antidepressants, we would see like a really bad results in the hypomania episodes potentially. So yeah, I'm glad that you didn't have to go through that, at least
Well, I did go through that.
later on.
Not in my 20s and 30s.
Okay.
After I was diagnosed with bipolar depression, I was introduced to antidepressants, and it was disastrous, completely disastrous. Yeah. It turned a normal pattern of bipolar into something that's called rapid cycling that you wouldn't wish on your worst enemy. And that rapid cycling, I thought I was never, ever, ever going to get well. I thought I was never, ever going to function again. Even after I stopped the antidepressant, the rapid cycling continued for 14 months. I just didn't know it was ever going to stop. And that's when your moods, people who don't know what rapid cycling is, that's where your mood changes, for me, hypermanic to depressed, but instead of over a course of weeks or months, and instead of a big episode once every year or two, this was happening every few days, every week. So I remember once I was reading the newspaper in the morning, and I was singing with the birds in the hedge at the start of it, and I was in despair, literal despair at the end of it. And this was, at the same time I'm trying to manage children, and it was just like so many people. When I got diagnosed, I met what's called a cascade of polypharmacy. So it was it felt like, well, that's not working, let's throw something else at that wall and see if it sticks.
Yep.
I mean, the medication road, that's a whole journey in itself. I think probably just to summarize that and just say, it's probably another long conversation, but there were lots and lots of medications which I learned to handle better. But even though I took the medications, none of them ever removed bipolar from my life.
Mm-hmm.
But I was eventually able to come up with a medication regime that when I was actually having a hypomanic episode, I could dampen how high I went and how long,
Elastic.
in conjunction with lots and lots of lifestyle work. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. And I love that you're bringing that in. And as we're speaking of that, maybe, before we move forward, I just want to acknowledge your willingness to talk about this and to share raw and vulnerably all the truth and the despair and the depth of, like just desperation and darkness that was there. And I'm truly grateful that you're able to speak about that as something that was there, yet you no longer live there. And yet,
Yeah.
want to acknowledge how, severe it seems like, and the huge impact it had on the quality of your life, on those around you, on so many things. It's just, it's a big deal. And so,
Anybody who's had bipolar probably and has experienced bipolar depression, which is such a physical, it
mhm,
is such a physical thing. It is very different profile from major depressive disorder, depression. They're very different in the way they present in the body. Hopelessness and despair, and hopelessness is kind of, well, it is lack of hope. Despair is like a physical, it's like a physical place that you go to live. It's really, yeah.
yeah, yeah. And so, yeah, you dealt with all of this, obviously unwilling to, you were just put in that position, had to face those challenges, live that lifestyle, did your best to manage it as much as you could. And it sounds like it was quite severe and impactful. You were not offered the something that would help you really resolve that. So then tell us, how did you ever encounter, the ketogenic diet? How did you even hear about it? What were your initial thoughts?
Well, when I got diagnosed at 40, and so what I did was I started to educate myself about bipolar. I thought, well, what is this thing then? And obviously I could see the patterns of it now in my life. And I thought, well, goodness, this is a real thing, there's a reason why all this has been happening, do you know what I mean? So, and yeah, both these journeys were happening at the same time, exploring medication and exploring other ways to manage bipolar. So what I decided was that I would find out as much as I could about it, and then I would do absolutely everything that I could to resolve or minimize its impact. Now I knew what I was dealing with. I was going to go and do the best that I could to deal with that. And the first things I came across, as many people will who are reading, and if you haven't done it yet, go and read, is the possible role of inflammation, the possible role of oxidative stress, the possible role of fractured circadian rhythms, so like your daily rhythm. So I really, and even before I was diagnosed, I didn't have bright lights at night. I didn't have television at night because it didn't work for me. After I was diagnosed, I really nailed down my sleep patterns. I looked at diet. I realized that caffeine was a trigger. That put me in hospital once with a hypomanic episode, just too much caffeine. I realized that extreme junk food made me feel worse, not better. During this time, like so many of us, I had disordered eating, which probably turned into what would qualify as an eating disorder in relation to the medication. Well, I did red light therapy to improve mitochondrial health. I measured my inflammation markers. I wore a tracker for years, tracking my sleep, monitoring my sleep. I monitored my moods. I got to know my own patterns. I worked hard for years on identifying my triggers. And I worked hard for years on identifying my very first early warning signs, which was such valuable work, because it's very easy to miss the start of hypomania. You would think when it happens again and again and again that it'd be easy. But it's not. And long before your sleep disappears, there are early warning signs that are different for every person. Every person's different. So I did all that work, and my mantra became, how good can I get it?
I love it.
And I didn't know the answer. I don't know the answer to that. I still don't know the answer to that. How good can I get it? I don't know. But after almost 10 years of doing that, and dealing with stress was a huge one, learning to deal with stress properly was a huge one. After 10 years of doing that and 10 years of working with medications, I managed to get my particular pattern of bipolar disorder to the point where having an episode no longer destroyed the structures of my life. I was able to slot my depressed episodes in with sick leave from work or an understanding of it, where I was prepared to talk to people about what was happening. I was able to use antipsychotic medication to dampen the highs in acute periods, which lessened the highs, which for me lessened the length of the lows. My own understanding meant that I was no longer as distressed by the actual depression. I still experienced it, but it distressed me less. That's a very odd distinction. Okay, and so that brought me up. I was doing pretty well, and then I met keto.
How?
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
Well, as I said, I'd also met along the way a cascade of polypharmacy, which hadn't gone, and I lost a bit of trust along the way. I got to the point where I simply didn't believe that medications were going to resolve all my symptoms. I certainly didn't believe that anymore, and I felt that some of the medications I wanted to use in different ways. So in antipsychotics, I only wanted to use them in acute phases, not as maintenance medication. So I made that adjustment. And then I was on a mood stabilizer called lamotrigine. And I decided that as I was still having episodes really quite regularly, it didn't seem to be working. And so I thought that I would stop taking that medication. That would be something that I wanted to taper, because it wasn't having a beneficial effect, And so I tried to get off the lamotrigine, tapering it, and I got caught with terrible withdrawals, just terrible. In fact, it took 3 goes and 2 years to get off lamotrigine for me, and I learned a lot about tapering in that process. But one day I was sitting there and I thought, why can't I get off this lamotrigine? What is this stuff? What is this drug? And I thought, well, I better go and find out what lamotrigine does in my brain pathways. I better try and find out what lamotrigine is. And so I started looking up lamotrigine, and I came across the fact that it's a drug that was made for epilepsy. It's an anti-seizure medication. And I happened to read in an article that when drugs such as lamotrigine don't work for epilepsy, a ketogenic diet is tried.
Yes.
I was on 3 epilepsy drugs at that time that wasn't controlling bipolar. And I looked at this and I went, a diet that people use when these drugs don't work. And I have these medications in my life and they're not working. And then I did some reading, and I came across a man by the name of Dr. Ian Campbell on a podcast, and I heard Ian Campbell say the lights went back on in my brain, and I thought, well, obviously that's ridiculous. That can't be that good. That's just that, nothing's that good. And I read about a ketogenic diet and various anecdotes, and sort of went through that pre-contemplative change, almost like an addict would, about, can I really give up sourdough and toast? Can I really, like, this diet's this diet's it is a very, very different way of eating. And it took me a while to even think whether I could I live without toast? Could I live without pasta? And then I did it. And I felt my body go into ketosis, and it was like the lights went back on in my brain. And I felt in a way that I hadn't felt since I was 15 years old.
Wow.
And
Wow. So yeah, and I know this deserves just like, this is such a powerful insight, right? And I love, and I was like, really, my heart was, racing when I heard you, because it was so similar for me too. Like, exactly the same process, right? Like, I first was put on epilepsy drugs, just like you, Lamictal, for bipolar type 2 depression. So I never figured it out. Why am I on epilepsy drugs if I'm not having any seizures? Like, I didn't know anything about this kind of things, right? And then the connection with epilepsy and keto and all, like, starting to research how much there is. And it sounds like for you, it was how long ago was that you first hear about the ketogenic diet?
So it took me a while to start the diet. So that would have been 2021.
Okay. Yeah, about, the same time like me. I don't know about you, but I couldn't find enough data back then for, excitement and like encouragement of people who have tried it. And like, maybe I was looking for it, but I couldn't find it.
one podcast from Ian Campbell. There was a guy in Scandinavia. I can't find that post anymore, but he tried the ketogenic diet for weight loss and then jumped online and said, oh my goodness, my schizophrenia is resolving. Yeah, not so much at all. And then, you know, over the next year or so, stuff started filtering through from Chris Palmer, and I don't know, or I just got better at finding it. I don't know,
Yeah,
but
yeah, maybe both. But yeah, so then you said you felt like you did at 15 or before your symptoms even started. So tell us more about that. Like how
well,
did it
it's
started? Yeah.
it's kind of because, you know, I did my introduction, said, look, I had episodes of bipolar, and then, you know, sections where I really was quite well, and then I'd have another episode. So bipolar was episodic for me, except when I went on keto, I realized that between episodes, I'd been dealing with all sorts of stuff that I simply didn't deal with anymore on keto. So one of the big ones for me was, and this has been a huge difference in my life and what I've been able to achieve in the last few years, I was able to start, middle, and finish something. I was able to choose that I'd like to do a study course, and then I was able to start it, do it, and finish it, you know, and not be derailed by illness. I'm calmer. My parenting is, you know, improved. I'm less distracted. I'm managing something like bipolar disorder, and then again the medication, some of those which are also sedating. The energy toll that takes on you. So I was one of those people who'd get through my day, but was then, you know, sort of half nodding off on the couch at 8 o'clock at night. And I thought, well, this is not optimal. This is not optimal parenting. But I was exhausted. I was pleased that I could get through the day and earn an income, because I was a single mum at that stage, you know. But I had nothing left at the end of that. So I managed the school runs and the lunch boxes and the work, but there was nothing left. And then, you know, keto came along, and that's just not me anymore. I just, you know, I just had energy. There's a clarity, there's a lack of brain fog. My sleep is improved. What else has happened? I'm not malnourished anymore. I have complete peace and freedom around food. Binge eating disorder completely resolved. Cravings for food, which have been with me since my adolescence, completely resolved. The thing you hear about ketogenic diets over and over again from people who do them is food peace. I am, from the outside, it looks like a restricted diet. On the inside, it feels like a diet of freedom. I now have complete freedom around food. I'm not controlled by cravings. I don't get hangry. I don't have fluctuations in blood sugar that upset my mood. I'm not having to white knuckle through resisting carb cravings. That happened when I was a carb eater. That doesn't happen now I'm on keto. The complete, if I didn't do keto for bipolar, I would do keto for eating disorders. I would. It would be worth it enough for that. The difference that has made in my life, not living with eating disorders. And again, the shame point around eating disorders. If anyone's ever lived with an eating disorder, you blame yourself. And gone, vanished from my life.
Wow, wow. How amazing. How amazing. Like I just love hearing that. And it just shows on your face like the energy and the vitality and just your ability to cognitively function at your best and put your whole life in order. It is just so hardworking and impressive.
You know, my triglycerides and HDL levels have improved. My inflammation markers are down under 1. I've also lost around 20 pounds in weight. I don't have aching joints. The hair on my face, my décolletage on my shoulders has disappeared because that was from malnutrition. I was malnourished before I started this diet because of disordered eating, binging and restricting. That's gone. Yeah.
I love hearing that. And so tell me, how did you start it? Like, did you start by yourself? Did you work with someone? How did that go?
No, I did this all entirely on my own. And as you said, in 2021, there aren't as many resources
Yeah.
out there as now. So I'd just like to say at the start of this part of this conversation, I'd just like to say this, I lived with bipolar disorder for 35 years. I did not have to jump into keto all gung-ho, feet first in 3 days.
Mhm.
I could have adopted a ketogenic diet and lifestyle over the course of a month when I began. If I had eased myself into keto, for anybody out there who's thinking about doing keto, do some reading first. And if you've been living with these mental health conditions for a very long time, really taking a few weeks to ease yourself into this process will be kinder and easier and carry less risk.
Yeah.
So I just stopped. I just stopped eating. I just went down to under 20 grams of carbs a day, and I just did that. And I was in ketosis sort of a week later. But going into ketosis that rapidly, you can feel the withdrawal from being used to carbohydrates and how that affects your energy. It can also cause problems with your sleep. And I went into ketosis, felt great. And like most people, taking up a ketogenic lifestyle, I'm not sure if there's people out there who've taken up a ketogenic lifestyle and then never slipped off the wagon. I think most of us start this and then, we have a bit of cake here or there and we drop ourselves out of ketosis and maybe it doesn't feel good. And maybe then we go back in again. So my first few months were sort of a bit in and out.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end of a couple of months, I went, actually, I do feel better in. And when I feel out, I'm out. I don't feel good at all. And so I jumped in feet first again and went, right, this is it. I'm just going to go complete keto. And unfortunately, the lack of sleep led me to a hypomanic episode that I wasn't able to control, that also saw me drop keto along the way because I was ill and I was doing things that lacked judgment. But when you're dealing with something where the adaptation phase can cause loss of sleep and where loss of sleep might be a trigger for illness for you, if you've got the ability to talk this over with, hopefully a psychiatrist, your care provider, anybody who's helping you some support or get some information around this, I would most definitely recommend that. And if you're not able to do that, then these days there are podcasts. Dr. Georgia Ede has written a book, Change Your Diet, Change Your Mind, about how one might adopt the diet in ways that aren't quite so difficult. You really can, you can adopt this diet more easily, or you can adopt this diet. Obviously, it's up to the person to choose that. But if I was going back in time, I'd have just replaced one meal a day. I'd have just replaced breakfast with a low-carb breakfast for a week. Then I would replace breakfast and lunch for a low-carb breakfast and lunch for a week. And then I would have done the same with dinner, and then I would have knocked out snacks. And at the end of the month, I would have been in keto,
Right. And you would avoid the hypomania, the lack of sleep, all the keto flu symptoms. It's just more gentle, more sustainable. And yeah.
It took 6 months out of my life, that particular episode. That was a big episode. And I could have avoided it all just by going a little bit. Because I think the thing about keto is, the wonderful thing about it is if you're sitting there with no help, with some education, you can do this, and it's not going to cost you anything. It's just a change of eating. There's no expense attached to this treatment, you know. Oh, I've lost my train of thought there. Oh, I was going to say that, you know, you and I both share a journey here in that we were looking at epilepsy. And, you know, when you think about an illness like epilepsy, it doesn't, you know, it's very obvious when someone's having seizures that that's a really serious thing. And when you think about that a ketogenic diet, a clinical ketogenic diet can stop a seizure, we can see what a powerful treatment this is. So on the one hand, it's just a change of way of eating. It sounds like a walk in the park. Right. On the other hand, it is a powerful treatment, and I would say I would approach it with as much care. You won't need as much caution, perhaps, but as much care as you would approach taking a neuroleptic medication. I would say if you're going to take a new medication and you're on the lookout for side effects and how it's affecting you, I would say if you start a ketogenic diet, this is going to be a powerful change to the way your body operates.
Yeah. And absolutely, just I so agree with that. And I also, for me, when I was implementing it, is I was also being able to taper off. And for me, keto was in place of medication, is what I was using now to treat my symptoms. And just as you said, on those days when you're out of it, my symptoms would come back. And that's the equivalent of me not taking my medication. It just showed up to be the ketogenic diet. But nowadays, when I talk about it, the first thing I say is that the power of this treatment is not that it's a diet. It's not as much of a nutrition like the Mediterranean diet or any other diet. It's so much more.
You can eat an unhealthy keto diet.
Right.
Yeah.
So powerful, which is why we can, get off medications and achieve tremendous improvement that is sustainable, that has no side effects, and that is why.
And on that note, I should say, when I was talking about all those things I did before, about managing my sleep and my diet and red light therapy, I still do some of them because I think they're really good health building strategies. Everyone should go and get as much health as they can, and all those things are good for health. But like you were just saying, that this is what you use to manage your symptoms. Exactly. I no longer take any medication. It took me through from the start of tapering medication all through this ketogenic journey. I only finished tapering my last medication in March this year. So it took 3 years, all up, very slow, very cautious, very careful tapering. But yeah, because my symptoms are completely, well, I don't even think that my symptoms are controlled by a ketogenic diet. I just think that a ketogenic diet means I don't actually have symptoms. I don't actually have symptoms to control when I'm on a ketogenic diet. It's not like they're still there and somehow magically being, managed. I think when I'm in ketosis and living my life this way, I just don't have anything to manage.
Yeah, it's like this resolution at the root, right? Like it's just no longer there. Yeah, because
resolution at the root. Absolutely, Donica. Yes. And I'm not a neuroscientist. I don't know. I mean, there's a trial being done at JCU by a neuroscientist. Zoltan Chanier and Carlo Longatano are doing a trial at James Cook University in Australia where 100 people are going through a randomized control trial. So we will get, and Zoltan's work, began looking at mice. He is looking at all the little pathways of the brain. Can I explain everything that's happening there? No, yeah, I can't, but I don't have to, because with 100 years of use in this diet behind it in epilepsy, is this diet fundamentally safe? Yes, we know it is, because it's one of the most studied diets on the planet, because it's been used in clinical settings in epilepsy for decades. So it has been studied and studied and studied, because people say, well, you go on a keto diet, Shannon, you're gonna die of a heart attack. No, you're not. And that's another long conversation about your lipid profile and your cholesterol, and why eating fat won't make you fat, and myths from big food, and you could go down a huge pathway there. But the take home should be that in terms of, is this diet safe, there's a lot of things that are written fairly glibly on the internet, but there's also a lot of hard science behind using a ketogenic diet for clinical therapy, not necessarily in bipolar or schizophrenia, in epilepsy. So getting the evidence in for bipolar, schizophrenia, that's what's happening now. But yeah, is it safe? I wasn't sure. And so I did a fair bit of research before I began. Yeah.
Yeah, and here you are, a living example of someone who no longer suffers from all those devastating symptoms you were explaining. And that's just such a joy to see. And you tell me if that's how you feel, but a very big and important part of this journey that I love about keto and this type of intervention is the ability to claim your personal responsibility on your health. Through the diet, you are able to have a saying in how your health is going to be. And like you mentioned, my motto is how good can I get it to be? And what a gift is that for some, instead of you being prescribed and like you being told that this is what you need to take for the rest of your life. And if it works, then that's great. But what if it doesn't? What if it doesn't really work well for you and it comes with tons of side effects? And it really, your life is not at the quality where you want it to be, is also something you spoke to. And out of a sudden, this simple or, relatively like a treatment that gives you the power to do something about your own health and increase the quality of your own life. I find this fascinating because not only it helps us with resolution of symptoms at the root, but it also gives us a choice and it gives us that power, that personal empowerment that I love about this intervention. And I wonder if that's something you
Oh, and just something you touched on there. I mean, I was told that, and I really dislike this word, I was told that I had a chronic illness that would be lifelong, that I would probably never be able to hold down a full-time job, that my parenting would be affected, and that I would have to be on heavy medications for life. My parenting is a joy. I work full-time in a very challenging job. I take no medications. I don't have any periods of illness. I don't take a medication. Not only do I not take a medication for bipolar, but I don't take a medication for anything else either. I'm in perfect health. And the level of I worked as a peer support worker in mental health services for a few years, in the last few years as well. I don't do it anymore, but, I became very much aware that this message of chronic hopelessness, you're going to be chronically ill on heavy medication for the rest of your life, is a common messaging. And even before I met ketogenic diet, with disciplined work on lifestyle changes and careful work on making that medication, rather than heavy medication, the lowest effective dose of medication, by doing those two things, lifestyle and lowest effective dose, I would no longer have called myself, chronic in that sense. And then with a ketogenic diet, of course, it's all completely gone. I'm completely healed. And I never thought I would say that, but then I never thought I would appear on social media or on an interview or on a podcast. I never thought any of this would happen. I almost don't want to speak about it so joyfully and so beautifully, because you're absolutely right. By me walking into my kitchen and choosing to have my bacon and eggs without the toast, my entire mental health is in my own hands. And it is an easy diet. It takes a bit of getting used to, but once you are used to it, it's not a difficult thing to do. It's a very easy thing to do. Yeah.
Yeah, I always say like the way you feel about yourself and your life, taste, right? Like, or what you get out of this it's nothing worth screwing that up, right? Like, why a
No.
diet that allows you to be well satiated can be delicious and somewhat like, I also found it easy. And I just think it
Yeah.
all ties into what are you giving up compared to what are you getting out of it. And if it's like
Yeah.
whole life revamp, that's a good investment.
There's a quote from Coco Chanel, which is, in terms of sensitivity to eating disorders, this is a terrible quote, but Coco Chanel said, "Nothing tastes as good as skinny feels," right? And I think in this land, when I think about things like biscuits and toast, I'd say nothing tastes as good as mental health feels. There is not one food on this planet that if you give me a piece of chocolate cake on one hand and suicidal despair on the other, it is a simple choice point for me. Do I think a keto diet will work for everybody? No, probably not, actually, because I don't think we truly know all the cause of mental illness, and I'm sure it's not that simple for everybody. But would I recommend, if you're listening to this podcast, to see if you're one of the lucky ones for whom it does work? Absolutely. And, if it doesn't resolve all your mental health system, mental health problems, it is going to be powerfully effective in resolving any metabolic issues that you have. So I don't know that it will work for everybody. I'm not here saying it's a miracle and it's just do it and it'll work for you. I don't think the evidence is strong enough to say that yet. I sit here and say, for me, it was miraculous. Donica, you're sitting there with a smile on your face too. So, but I'm not making any more claims than where we're at the moment, is that it's safe. And there's a whole host of people like us with smiles on our faces who are not dealing with mental illness and who are not on medication. And I can't tell you that it will work. I can only tell you that I believe it's safe to try.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Shannon. I think your share and seeing you living that lifestyle and sharing openly everything, the good and the bad and the like, just the truth, speaking your truth, living your own experience and sharing that with others is so precious, so valuable. I celebrate you where you've come. And I just acknowledge the strength and the resilience. And I think you're just such a great example of being this winner of the award that honors those qualities.
Well, I
But
should say for those listening, so are you a winner of an award, Donica. So Donica, you haven't mentioned that yourself, but you're also the recipient of Metabolic Mind Award. And but yeah, what you're doing is something that I couldn't do, to set up this platform so this message can get out there, because it's really, really important work that you do, because there is pushback against this, the idea of this from mainstream medicine. There is a resistance, I think, to the idea that a diet, that it's possible for a diet to do something that 70 years of medications have failed at. And that is a mind-blowing concept. But this sort of thing that you're doing, this is how we get that message out.
yeah, and I think we're all in it together, and that's the best way I know to give back to people that I was in that position, right? Both of us were, and so many people are, where I wasn't offered that treatment, because I think it can be and I'm living it now, for long enough time to be able to contest to its efficiency and effectiveness in the long run. And I was told that it cannot be done. It's not possible. And so this is the platform where we just show up to share authentically our experiences. What are our lived experiences? We don't know how this is going to go. We don't know. It's
No.
very obviously bio-individual. There's so many layers into it. Yet it's something we found helpful, and we just want to talk about it and see if anyone who may be interested in that message wants to hear and learn from that. So I thank you for your time, for your openness and willingness to share. I found this very joyful and inspiring. Appreciate everything you had to contribute to the field. And one final question that I have for you is, how do you see your future from here on? I'm curious. How do you see yourself as someone who no longer has to deal with mental illness? What becomes available to you in your life? How is it different? I'm just curious.
In 2.5 years, I've taken a job that's interesting and intellectually stimulating with a level of responsibility. For myself, I would like to do I would like to follow a pathway of thinking and work, and actually be able to create a body of work in the world, whether that's through my employment or creative things. But I think for me, there's going to be a lot of joy in actually being able to work. I've spent a long time, periods in my life, of unemployed or underemployed or in work that wasn't intellectually stimulating or challenging. So for me, it's a matter of how far can I go, and I'd like some of that to be lived experience work, and I'd like some of that to be about the ketogenic diet. I mean, I would love to run a project that, because people say that we can't adhere to this.
Yeah.
You know, it's hard to adhere to. I'd like to get some hard research from people like you and me, because like, you know, if I ask you, Donica, scale of 1 to 10, is this hard to adhere to? How do you find it?
Again, going back to it, why I was able to sustain it for such a long time is because it really wasn't, and it was so worth it. As a matter of fact, I felt like this is a dream coming true. Like, can it be so easy to get such an impactful results and improve my quality of life? It was like a no-brainer not to do it. Like, it really was.
That's right. Yeah, and yet we hear again and again and again that people can't do the diet, it's not sustainable, it's not, people can't adhere to it, it's not sustainable. Honestly, the amount of times I hear it's not sustainable. So I'd like to get some hard research down on that about why it is sustainable. That's what I'd like to do. Yeah.
I love it. I love it. Awesome. Thank you so much, Shannon. It was a pleasure spending this time with you. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.